By the time I turned 11, everyone in my family had already decided what I was going to be. Not in the way parents dream about their kids becoming doctors or hockey players or engineers. More like the way you look at a dented old car in the driveway and think, well, it runs, I suppose. That was me. The one who runs, I suppose. My sister Danielle was the golden one. 4 years older, sharp as a tack, full scholarship to McGill, then law school, then a firm in downtown Toronto where she made partner before she was 35. My parents talked about her the way people talk about the weather in July, constantly, enthusiastically, like it was the only topic worth having. Danielle got straight A's. Danielle clerked for a federal judge. Danielle married a man named Reginald, whose family had a cottage on Lake Muskoka and another one in the eastern townships. I got decent grades. I worked summers at a hardware store in Barrie. I drove a 2004 Honda Civic that my dad called the Tin Can, even though it started every single morning without complaint, which is more than I could say for the Lexus he financed at 22% interest. Nobody said it out loud, not directly, not cruelly, not in the way you could point to and say that right there. That was the moment. It was quieter than that. It was my mother not asking about my work at Thanksgiving. It was my dad changing the subject when I mentioned I was taking a night course in hospitality management. It was Danielle looking at me across the dinner table with that particular expression she had not mean, not even condescending exactly, just sort of absent, like I wasn't quite worth the full cost of her attention. I was 23 when I got my first job at a mid-size hotel in Collingwood. Front desk, minimum wage plus tips when guests felt generous, which wasn't often. I wore a burgundy vest that itched at the collar and I smiled at strangers for 8 hours a day, and I learned everything I could about how a hotel actually worked. Not just the front-facing part, the logistics, the occupancy models, the vendor contracts, the seasonal pricing strategies. I read every industry report I could find. I took online courses at night. I asked questions that apparently nobody in entry-level positions was supposed to ask, because my manager at the time, a tired man named Gerald, kept looking at me like I'd walked in through the wrong door. But Gerald also answered my questions. And Gerald's boss, a woman named Patricia who'd been running hotel operations in Ontario for 25 years, noticed that I asked them. She took me under her wing in the quiet, practical way that some older professionals do, not with fanfare, not with mentorship programs or formal check-ins, but by including me in conversations I had no business being in, by pointing at things and saying, "You see what they did wrong there?" and trusting me to understand the answer. I didn't tell my family much about any of this, not because I was hiding it, but because they rarely asked. At Christmas, my mother would say, "And how is the hotel job going, Marcus?" And I would say, "Good. Really good, actually," and she would nod and turn back to Danielle, who was in the middle of explaining some fascinating thing about a pellet procedure that apparently needed to be finished before the turkey got cold. My full name is Marcus Thibault. I know that sounds very Quebecois for someone who grew up in Barrie. And it is because my paternal grandmother was from Rimouski, and my grandfather anglicized everything he could except the last name, because he said it was the only thing his mother gave him that cost her something. I always liked that story. I thought about it a lot during the years when I was learning what it meant to build something from nothing. By the time I was 28, I had saved enough, combined with a small business loan I'd spent 4 months preparing the application for, to acquire a partial stake in a struggling inn outside of Huntsville. 42 rooms, a dated restaurant, a dock on a small lake that nobody was using properly. My business partner was a man named David Okafor, who I'd met at a hospitality conference in Ottawa, and who had 15 years of operations experience and zero sentimentality about what a property needed to succeed. We were a good match. We spent the first year gutting the place quietly. Not literally, we kept it running while we renovated, which is its own particular kind of controlled chaos. We redid the restaurant. We rebuilt the dock and added kayak rentals and a small outdoor fire pit area that turned out to be what people actually wanted. We renegotiated every vendor contract. We trained the staff ourselves. David handled finance. I handled everything guest-facing and most of the operational details that fell between categories. By the end of year 2, we were turning a profit. Small at first, then less small. We reinvested almost everything. We acquired a second property in year 4, a boutique hotel in Prince Edward County that had good bones and a bad reputation. The kind of combination that scares most buyers and excites people like David and me. By year 7, We had 4 properties under our management company, Vantage Stays, 31 full-time employees, and another 20 or so seasonal staff. A portfolio that a Toronto business magazine briefly mentioned in a roundup of emerging independent hospitality brands in Ontario. I drove the same Honda Civic to work until it had 340,000 kilometers on it. Then I drove a slightly newer Honda Civic. I wore the same kind of clothes I'd always worn. I lived in a condo in Huntsville that was nice, but not conspicuous. I didn't talk about any of it at family dinners, partly because nobody asked, and partly because I had learned something about silence that I don't think I could have articulated at 23, but understood completely by 32. There is a particular kind of power in being underestimated by people who should know better. You don't have to do anything with it, but it's there, solid and patient, like money in an account nobody knows you have. My parents' 35th wedding anniversary fell on a Saturday in September. Danielle organized the whole thing, which was very Danielle. She'd found a venue in Niagara-on-the-Lake, a beautiful heritage property that did private events, high-end, the kind of place where the waitstaff wear actual dress shoes and the napkins are folded into shapes. She'd booked out the private dining room for 22 guests. Family, a handful of my parents' oldest friends, Reginald's parents, because apparently they were close now. She called me 3 weeks before the date. I remember I was in the middle of reviewing a staffing proposal for the Prince Edward County property, and I almost didn't pick up. "Marcus," she said, "I wanted to talk to you about the anniversary dinner." "Sure," I said. "I'm coming, obviously." There was a pause that lasted just a half-second too long. "Right, of course. I just wanted to make sure you understood the kind of event it's going to be. It's quite formal. It's at Whitmore House. Do you know it?" I knew it. Not personally, but professionally I knew its ownership group and its revenue per available room and its recent renovation timeline. "I've heard of it," I said. "It's lovely, but it is expensive," Danielle said. And there it was, that particular careful tone she used when she was trying to say something without saying it. "The dinner per head is going to be around $250, plus wine. Reginald and I are covering most of it, but we're asking everyone to contribute for their own seat, and I just wanted to check in with you about whether that works, given I know the hospitality industry can be a bit unpredictable." I sat with that for a moment. The hospitality industry can be a bit unpredictable. I was 34 years old, and I owned a stake in 4 hotels, and she was asking me, gently, and with plausible deniability, whether I could afford a $250 dinner. "That's completely fine," I said. "I'll be there." Another pause. "You're sure? Because we could absolutely seat you at a different arrangement. There's a lovely—" "Danielle," I said. "I'll be there. I'll send you my credit card details for the deposit." She sounded relieved in a way that was somehow worse than if she'd just been openly dismissive. "Perfect. And Marcus, it's black tie optional, just so you know." I owned a tuxedo. I'd had occasion to wear it at industry events and fundraising galas, and twice at functions where we'd been recognizing long-term staff. But she didn't know that. I said, "I'll figure something out," and let her hear whatever she needed to hear in that sentence. I didn't tell David about any of this. I didn't tell anyone. I drove the 2 hours to Niagara-on-the-Lake on a Saturday morning in September. Parked my car in a public lot 2 blocks from Whitmore House, walked in through the front entrance at 6:15 in my tuxedo, and checked into the room I'd quietly reserved under my own name 3 weeks earlier. Not one of the standard rooms. The property's best suite, which had a 4-poster bed and a private terrace overlooking the gardens, and cost, I believe, somewhere around $600 a night. I was early, so I sat on the terrace for a while with a glass of sparkling water and looked out over the gardens and listened to the sound of the Niagara region in September, the particular quality of the air, the way the light looked at that hour. I had been in the hospitality business long enough to appreciate a well-run property when I saw one. Whitmore House was well-run. The groundskeeping was excellent. The attention to seasonal detail in the garden design was genuine, not cosmetic. I made a mental note to look into who did their landscaping contracts. The private dining room opened at 7. I arrived at 7 to 10. My parents were already there. My mother in a dress I recognized from Danielle's wedding 8 years ago. My father looking slightly uncomfortable in a suit jacket that pulled at the shoulders. They were standing with Reginald's parents near the bar, and my father saw me first and waved, and my mother smiled and kissed me on the cheek and said I looked very nice, And for a moment it was just a normal family gathering, and I felt the particular ache of that. How easy it would be if we could just be normal. Danielle arrived 15 minutes later in a gown that probably cost more than my first month's rent in Collingwood. She looked beautiful, and she knew it. She scanned the room with the efficiency of someone who organized things for a living, spotted a detail she didn't like near the centerpiece arrangement, corrected it with the calm authority of a woman who had never questioned her own right to correct things, and then found me near the window and gave me the kind of hug that has warmth in it, but also a faint appraisal built in, checking that I was dressed appropriately, I think, and finding that I was, which seemed to slightly unsettle her. "You look great," she said, and there was just the thinnest thread of surprise in it. "So do you," I said, and meant it. The dinner was excellent. I will give Danielle full credit for that. The food was genuinely well executed. The kitchen clearly had a strong hand on consistency, which is harder than it sounds at this scale and price point. The wine was good. My parents were happy in the way they only really were when Danielle arranged something, a little glossy with pride and appreciation, and I watched my father toast them both and say something about 35 years being longer than most things last in this world, and worth celebrating accordingly, and I thought, this is what you do for the people you love. You show up, you sit at the table, you drink the wine and smile at the toasts, and let the old stories be told one more time. I was doing fine until dessert. I'd gotten up briefly to use the restroom, and when I came back, I caught the tail end of a conversation between Danielle and Reginald and his mother, Eleanor, a thin, silver-haired woman from Rosedale who wore her money the way some people wear good posture automatically, unconsciously, as if it had never occurred to her that the world could be arranged any other way. I heard Eleanor say something about the suite on the second floor, and Reginald mentioned the room rates, and then Danielle said, in a lowered voice, that she did not lower quite enough. "Marcus is staying somewhere down the road, I think." He mentioned a place. You know how it is, the dinner was already a stretch. I didn't want to put pressure on him about accommodation on top of it. Eleanor murmured something sympathetic. "He's always been the one who you know. He didn't take the academic path. He's in hotels, which is fine. It's steady work, but it's not like Reginald's line or anything." I stood in the doorway for 3 full seconds. Nobody saw me. I walked back to my seat. I finished my dessert, which was a very good lavender creme brulee, and I talked to my aunt about her grandchildren, and I listened to my father tell the same story about their honeymoon in Cape Breton that he'd told at their 25th anniversary dinner and their 30th, and I said goodnight to everyone at 10:30 and told my parents I loved them and would call during the week. I walked back through the main hotel, past the front desk where a young woman in a well-pressed uniform was checking in a late arrival, past the fireplace in the lobby that was doing exactly what a lobby fireplace should do in September, and I took the stairs up to the second floor and let myself into my suite, and stood on the private terrace for a long time in the dark. I wasn't angry. That surprised me a little. I had expected anger. If something like this ever happened, I'd imagined some version of this scene over the years, the way you do when you know a thing is coming even if you don't know its shape. But what I felt was something quieter and more complicated. Something like grief, maybe, for the version of my family that had never quite existed. And underneath it, something I had no name for, a kind of settled certainty, like a foundation after the frost goes out of the ground. In the hospitality industry, when a guest checks in, the system logs their loyalty tier, their stay history, their preferences. At properties in the Vantage Stays group, we'd built our own version of this, a simple but thorough profile system that let our staff treat returning guests like people rather than transactions. It was one of the things I was proudest of in what we'd built. What I had not mentioned to anyone in my family, because no one had ever asked, was that Vantage Stays had acquired its 5th property 4 months earlier, a heritage boutique hotel in Niagara-on-the-Lake, 92 rooms, a private dining program that had been underperforming for 3 years before we took it over and, in the 4 months since, had already begun to turn around under our new food and beverage director, Whitmore House. I hadn't planned the anniversary dinner this way. When Danielle first mentioned the venue 3 weeks before the event, I had experienced exactly one moment of dark amusement and then set it completely aside. I had not reserved the suite as a power move. I'd reserved it because it was my property, and it was my parents' 35th anniversary, and I wanted to be comfortable, and I had earned the right to be comfortable in a place I owned. That was all. But I will admit that when I went to bed that night, I slept very well. Sunday morning, I came down for breakfast at 8:30. The dining room was half full, a mix of weekend leisure guests, and a few couples who'd clearly been at some event the evening before. I found a table near the window that looked out over the garden, and I ordered coffee and the eggs. Benedict and I read an industry brief on my phone about occupancy trends in the Niagara region heading into the fall shoulder season. I was on my second cup of coffee when I became aware of a small disturbance near the entrance. Danielle and Reginald were at the host stand. Reginald was speaking to the front desk manager, a composed and professional young man named Tyler, who had been with the property since before our acquisition, and whom I'd retained because his guest satisfaction scores were exceptional. Danielle was holding a paper, which I could see from 20 feet away, was a billing summary. I watched Tyler explain something. I watched Reginald's expression shift. I watched Danielle look down at the paper and then up at Tyler and say something that Tyler answered with the patient clarity of someone who has been trained to deliver unwelcome information graciously. I found out afterward what had happened. The private dining room rental for the previous evening's event, which Danielle had booked through Whitmore House's events, team had come with a standard agreement that included a room minimum and a service charge, and a few line items that apparently had been in the contract but had not been closely read. When Danielle had called to confirm the booking, she'd spoken to our events coordinator, who had noted that the account had a notation on it. Not anything alarming, just a flag indicating that the ownership group had an interest in the file. Our events team had followed the booking through normally, but had routed the final billing summary for review by management before processing. By management, the system meant me. I hadn't flagged anything. I hadn't asked for any special treatment or any complications. I'd simply been aware that the booking existed, because it was my property, and I was aware of most of what went through it, especially in its first year under our management. But Tyler, being thorough and professional, had followed the protocol correctly when a billing query arose from a guest, and the file had an ownership notation. He was supposed to let me know before resolving it. So Tyler had sent me a text at 8:47 that morning. Mr. Thibault, we have a billing question at the front desk related to last night's private dining event. When you have a moment. I left my coffee and walked to the front desk. Danielle saw me coming from 20 feet away. I watched her face do something complicated, the half-smile of recognition, then a small confusion as she registered that I was walking toward the desk from inside the hotel, not from the entrance, and that I was carrying a coffee cup from the dining room, and that Tyler was turning toward me with the particular expression of a front desk manager greeting someone he was expecting. "Good morning," I said, generally, to both of them. "Marcus," Danielle said. "What are you?" She stopped. She looked at Tyler. She looked at me. "Are you staying here?" "I was," I said. "I'm checking out this morning." Reginald said, slowly, "You stayed at Whitmore House last night?" "I did." There was a pause. "We didn't know that," Danielle said, and the careful tone was gone now, replaced by something more raw. "Why didn't you say anything?" I picked up the billing summary that Tyler had set on the counter. I looked at it briefly, not because I needed to, but because it gave my hands something to do. "What was the question about the bill?" I asked Tyler. Tyler explained, concisely and without drama, that there were a few line items Miss Danielle had questions about regarding the event surcharge and the room minimum for the private dining booking. I looked at Danielle. She was very still. "I can walk you through these if you'd like," I said. "But they're standard. They're in the contract you signed." "You've seen the contract?" Reginald said, and something had shifted in his voice, a new, careful quality, replacing the mild condescension that had been there before. "Reginald," I said, and I kept my voice level and not unkind, because what I was about to say didn't need any help from tone. "I've seen every contract that's passed through this property for the last 4 months. We acquired Whitmore House in May. It's part of our hospitality group." The silence that followed was the kind that has texture to it. Like the air before a storm changes quality, goes denser, more expectant. Danielle said, very quietly, "You own this hotel." "A majority stake," I said. "My business partner and I. It's our 5th property." She looked at me for a long moment. I looked back. I thought about what she'd said the night before. He's in hotels, which is fine. It's steady work. And I thought about my mother, not asking about my work at Thanksgiving, and my father calling the Honda a tin can, and the half-second pause on the phone 3 weeks ago when Danielle had asked, gently and with plausible deniability, whether I could afford a $250 dinner. I thought about all of that, and then I let it go. Not in the dramatic way, not with a speech, not with the kind of moment where you say the thing you've been waiting years to say. Just let it go. Like opening your hand and watching something fall. The charges on the bill are correct, I said, but I'd like to comp the venue rental as an anniversary gift to Mum and Dad, if that's all right with you. I said the last part to Danielle directly, and I meant it as exactly what it was, a courtesy, an acknowledgement that she had planned the evening, and it had been genuinely good, and I was not interested in taking that from her. She looked like she might say several different things. She chose, finally, to say, "That's very generous." "It's their anniversary," I said. "They deserved a good evening." It was a good evening. I signed the comp authorization that Tyler prepared, shook Reginald's hand. He had gone very quiet, but he shook it firmly. I'll give him that, and told Danielle I'd call her during the week. I went back to the dining room. I finished my coffee. The eggs Benedict had gone slightly cold, but were still very good. I checked out at 10 o'clock. I tipped the housekeeping staff, which I always do, because I know what that work costs a person. I walked the 2 blocks to the public lot where I'd parked, got into my car, and started the drive back north toward Huntsville. Somewhere outside of Barrie, my phone rang. It was my mother. "I talked to Danielle," she said, and her voice had something in it I couldn't quite categorize. Not quite apology, not quite pride. Something unfinished, like a sentence that had been started and then reconsidered. "I know," I said. "Marcus." A pause. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. "You never asked, Mum," I said. And I tried to say it simply, without accusation, because that was how I meant it. And I think, honestly, I needed to know I could do it regardless. Does that make sense? She was quiet for a moment. "Your father wants to see the properties. He was talking about it all morning." I smiled at the highway ahead of me. "I'll set something up," I said. "Maybe Thanksgiving." "He called Danielle," my mother added, and something in her voice had loosened slightly, was almost amused. "He told her he always knew you were the sharp one. He called the Honda a tin can for 15 years, I said. She laughed, a real laugh, small and rueful. "It was a tin can. It has 340,000 kilometers on it, and has never once left me on the side of the road," I said. "Which is more than I can say for the Lexus." She laughed again, longer this time. I drove north through the September afternoon. The trees along the 400 were just beginning to turn that first suggestion of color that, in another 2 weeks, would be the full blaze of an Ontario fall. It was the kind of drive that reminds you why you stay in this part of the world, even through the 7-month winters and the mud seasons and all the rest of it. Danielle called that evening. The conversation was short but real. She said she was sorry. Not in a big way. Not in a way that tried to account for years at once, but in the direct, precise manner of someone who is good with language and knew how to mean what she said when she chose to say it. I told her there was nothing to forgive, and I meant most of it. "I always thought you were just," she started. "I know what you thought," I said gently. "I should have asked," she said. "Yeah," I said. "You should have." There was a small silence that was not uncomfortable. "So," she said, 5 hotels. 4.5, I said. "We're still in the middle of repositioning Whitmore House. The food and beverage program still needs work." She was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, "I do contracts, commercial agreements. If you ever need." "I know you do," I said, "and you're very good at it. Send me your firm's rate card." She exhaled in a way that was almost a laugh. "Really? Really? But Danielle, I'm a client, same as anyone. I need someone who reads the contract before signing it." This time she did laugh. I was 34 years old. I had built something real and lasting from a starting point that most people would have found discouraging. I had done it without anyone's approval or acknowledgement or even awareness. And I think the thing I understood now, on the other side of that weekend in Niagara-on-the-Lake, was that I had never actually needed those things. They would have been nice. There is a particular loneliness in succeeding quietly while the people closest to you don't notice. I won't pretend otherwise. But a foundation does not need to be admired to hold weight. It just needs to be built right. I had built mine right. Whatever you are building right now, in whatever corner of your life, with whatever tools you have available to you. Here is what I wish I could tell the 23-year-old version of myself standing at that hotel front desk in Collingwood, in the burgundy vest that itched at the collar. The people who underestimate you are not your judges. They are not your audience. They do not determine the value of what you are creating. Do the work anyway. Learn the thing that nobody expects you to learn. Ask the questions you're not supposed to ask. Build slowly, carefully, with more attention to the foundation than to how the building looks from the street. You don't need to announce yourself. The work will do that, in time, in its own way, in rooms you haven't walked into yet, and drive whatever car gets you there. Mine had 340,000 kilometers on it and never once let me down.